I'm Norman Hedrick, Louisiana Oyster Fisherman. Actually, we call ourselves oyster farmers because growing oysters is so much like growing any other kind of food crop. The skies and winds and waters must favor me as any other farmer. My fields are the water bottoms, the unseen oyster reefs which lie beneath blue waters of the Gulf of Mexico, along hundreds of miles of marshy shoreline, beneath countless bays and lakes and shifting islands, which lie east and west of the mouth of the mighty Mississippi River, and make our 400-mile coastline the finest place in America for the cultivation of oysters. I'm in business with my three brothers. Together, we lease about 1,000 acres of water bottoms. My brother Gerald built our 68-foot lugger, the second largest boat in Louisiana's fleet of 350 oyster boats. We named her for our mother, the Miss Loretta. She makes us a snug home for 9 months of the year, for in Louisiana's mild climate, we oystermen can work almost the year round. The season opens in September, when we plant seed oysters in our bedding grounds. Everybody's happy then, eager, feels in his bones this will be the best year yet. Aboard the Miss Loretta, my brother Roy and I go over our plans again. Trace the passage we must make from bedding grounds on the west side of the Mississippi River, through the Empire Locks, down 5 miles on the river, through the Ostrika Locks, and then on to the east side, where we'll gather seed oysters from natural reefs. From Barataria to Black Bay, there are hundreds of bays, bayous, and reefs where earthy, sweet water of the big river pours into the salty seas of the Gulf of Mexico. These water bottoms are the richest in America, making our Louisiana oysters the fattest and tastiest, and our oyster production one of the fastest growing in the nation. Along this coast, generations of fishermen have made their homes. More than half a century ago, native Louisianians were joined by immigrants from southern Europe, from Dalmatia along the Adriatic shores. These strong, hard-working men lived lonely lives in small, bare camps. Silently, patiently gathering the riches from these fertile waters, bettering themselves a little each year, building their camps on tiny islands of shells, laboriously gathered from their own oyster beds. Tonging oysters by hand, sweating 12 and 15 hours a day, planting and replanting their oysters with crude tools, poor equipment, and finally, after years of lonely, back-breaking work, bringing their wives and their families from Europe. Today, their sons and grandsons live comfortably in bigger, better camps with newer, finer equipment. Along our coast, we call the Dalmatians tacos, and we love them, father and son and grandson. They've made big business of our Louisiana oyster industry, for they know the ways of the sea in boats and fishing and oysters. Like many others, Captain Joe Franks came alone to the Delta many years ago. He brought his eldest son, Jelko, from Europe when he was 17, and other sons later. The boys worked for their keep and $10 in cash their first year. Today, they're worth, well, I'd say a small fortune. That's what you can do on the Delta, with hard work and a know-how with oysters. Today, the old-timers live with their families around them. And when they get together, their talk is always the same. Better ways to grow oysters, and of course about their old friends on the Delta. Strong, hard-working tacos, who in the old days could work 75 sacks of clean oysters a day, alone and by hand. and younger men who with modern equipment work as hard as their fathers. They talk, too, of native Louisianians, Cajuns who've grown rich fishing Barataria Bay. Men who've sweated and toiled in the Delta marshlands and made Louisiana's oyster production outstanding. So this is my country. These are my people. And this is the business my brothers and I have chosen to live by. When the season opens in September, you'll find Jerry and me searching for the best water bottoms in Barataria Bay. We'll lease these from the state of Louisiana to bed our seed oysters and start our farming operations. We must build fences like any other farmer. We mark the corners of our lease with our name and number, H.B. Hedrick Brothers. It's a good feeling when we plant the first marker of the season, and our deckhands begin to stake the whole fence line. 1,000 acres of Louisiana water bottoms, enough to earn a good income for our 4 families. We'll work only about a third of the acreage each year and rotate our plantings like any other good farmer. Engineers from the state's Wildlife and Fisheries Commission will survey our lease and record it in their office. We pay the state $1 an acre per year rental for 1,000 acres. They survey it for a small fee. Another of the many fine things the State Commission's men do for us. When we've marked our bedding grounds in Barataria Bay on the west side of the Mississippi, we must travel almost 100 miles through marshlands, canals, and river to reach the seed ground area on the east side. Traffic in the Port Sulphur Canal is heavy. Sulphur barges, oil boats, all kinds of industry in our coastal waterways. We pass alongside the pipeline which goes out to Freeport Sulphur's marshland plant. These oystermen have already loaded their seed from the natural reefs and are on their way to Barataria Bay to do their planting. They've just come through Empire, Louisiana, a fishing village on the Mississippi River. The state operates a lock here for the benefit of oyster and shrimp fishermen and tugboatmen. During the season, 600 fishing boats will use it, going back and forth from coastal waters on the east and the west sides of the river. Entering the Great River, we pass ocean-going liners on their way up to New Orleans. We go downriver, through the Ostrika locks to the east side, and search for natural oyster reefs and the riptides, where sweet water from the marsh meets salty waters of the Gulf, where currents wash clean over bottoms made rich by the soil and sedimentation from half a continent above. We sound for reefs, seeking the best seed. And we take samples with our modern dredges, operated by a winch in the foredeck. When we find a good reef, we mark it for our own convenience. The reefs are maintained free by the state for our use. Now comes the long job of loading the Miss Loretta with seed oysters. Working with us is our smaller boat, the 48-foot lugger we call the Marin B. She finds her own reef in shallow waters where the Miss Loretta cannot dredge. When the Marin B gets a load of seed, she comes alongside and we unload her catch onto the Miss Loretta. It takes 4 deck loads from the little boat to fill the big lugger. It's a long, hard haul. Usually takes a day and a half to load the Miss Loretta completely. Finally, the day ends, with the Marin B ready to tie up for the night. And the Miss Loretta ready to begin her overnight trip back to Barataria Bay. Her decks are low in the water, and it's a good feeling we have with a full load of seed oysters and a fair wind passage ahead to the west side. Coffee's good, too, on the all-night passage, and a pleasure to fix in the stainless steel galley. Our deckhand doubles as a cook. His chicken jambalaya, c'est magnifique. After supper, the boys catch a quick game of bourrée before turning in. Dawn finds us back on our bedding grounds in Barataria Bay, eager to up anchor and begin planting our seed oysters. Jerry, at the pilot wheel in the cabin, checks our location. Our men start the long, hard job of bedding down seed oysters and wish they'd foregone that bourrée game last night. Steering now with the 4-deck wheel, Jerry sees our neighbor get an early start too, the Slavich brothers, whose lease is just across our fence line. You know what an oyster man needs, even more than brains? Brawn. Takes a real man to shovel oysters like this for 3 straight hours. Maybe that's what makes us love it. Gets to be like a fever in a man's blood. To plant properly over the whole lease area, we circle the boat around and around in a series of circles. Bedding oysters takes skill, or it's not every man can twist the handle of his shovel to spread oysters just right. They've got to be spread evenly, hit the water bottoms in a pattern, not bunched up. In 3 hours, we can plant 600 barrels of oysters from the Miss Loretta. But it don't come easy, lad. By 8 o'clock, we've bedded a boatload and are ready to go back to Black Bay for another load. We'll work like this from September to early December and leave 15,000 barrels of seed oysters to grow in the rich water bottoms of our lease. Later, we begin our harvest of oysters planted 12 months ago. Early morning finds my brother Roy on the Marin B, working his crew to dredge up what we call sack oysters for counter use. Of the 3